Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning in to one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And I'm so thrilled that we're talking about the show Warrior today. We're so fortunate to be joined by James Foster, who is the production designer on the show, and Moira and Meyer, who is the costume designer. And I wanted to first ask you both about your process coming into the show, because you stepped in on season 2 for the first time. And so I was interested in, beyond just obviously watching the episodes themselves, what were the really valuable tools for you in terms of just navigating what this world really was already, so that you could then come in and bring your own creative vision to supplement that and continue to evolve it with the show?
Oh, well, yes, like you say, we had a fantastic first season to look at when we first started. I know that I was very excited to see those first 10 episodes and then read the scripts, which were in great shape right from the word go on our second season. And I think what excited me the most was the fact that we were going to go deeper into the characters that you'd been introduced to in the first season, and in the same respect, the scripts were opening out into more detail in terms of the environments, and there were lots of new environments that we could create that helped emphasize some of that character. And we opened up the whole other swathe of San Francisco that we needed to see in this next season, which was, in terms of set design, I know it was about as exciting as it gets. You know, you're creating these abandoned ship holes on what was the drained bay of San Francisco, and you think, no, that can't be real. And then you look at the historical fact, and it actually happened. You know, they abandoned all these boats in the gold rush in the 1850s, and the boat was they claimed the land underneath those boats as the land was coming out to meet them in the harbour. And so fact is stranger than fiction in some respects. It was amazing. And on top of that, going into all the other areas within Chinatown, which I wanted to show a little bit more of the kind of street life and some of the community spirit within the heart of Chinatown in the other streets that we were going to create. Which it was like couldn't wait to start when I read those scripts, I must say.
Yeah. How about for you, Moira?
Well, the thing is, I also, of course, was very excited to hear that I have been commissioned to do the second season. And then I also was very excited when I heard that I've also got a new production designer to work with, because it would have been a little bit awkward if I had to work maybe with Andrew Law, because he did the first. So when I met James, we also immediately decided that we want to do our own creative slant on the new season. And I must say that it's always nice actually to do a second season, because all the first season stuff is already established, and you can just then build on top of that. And I agree with James, it was fantastic to explore new characters. I mean, I had so many more characters to develop. There were so many more women, actually. I mean, anybody who's watched the series so far, we've met about 5 new women, starting with Vega, who is an incredible character to have designed. And I mean, it was quite interesting because I always had to be very closely in collaboration with Jonathan Tropper. He's very much that type of producer who's got his finger on the creative pulse, and he wants to see things, he wants to feel excited and inspired. And so he helped me also a lot, and James as well, to create some of these new characters. And that's maybe this creative collaboration that made this season so incredible, because I've watched all 10. You know, I'm a binge watcher. I've done it in 2 nights. And I think it's an incredible series. I really do, because I mean, I watch a lot of content and I'm very critical, and I think we've done good.
Yeah, no, you absolutely have. And it's so fantastically put together. And, you know, the creative vision that you both bring is just so intensely brilliant in every single scene and every single moment. And to that point, you know, James, I wanted to ask you about, you know, when you first get the scripts for a show like this, like what your process looks like in terms of how you start breaking it down, how you start kind of like pulling out like the small nuanced granular details that the script gives you, and then kind of like what your next steps are in terms of the first information that you need, the first questions that you start asking to start imagining how you're going to construct this world.
Well, I think, you know, taking, I tend to go deep into referencing when I first read the scripts, and you obviously there are particular scenes which have particular importance in terms of how you want to stage it, and so, you know, the likes of Meiling, the Queen of Chinatown, coming down into the impoverished heart of Chinatown. You kind of know that you want that sort of central staging, and you have an idea in mind with how you want to compose it. But then I get into a lot of referencing, like I say, and I looked a lot at the Chinatowns of San Francisco. There's plenty of photographs and etchings and whatnot from there. Not a huge amount. But also, in wanting to understand how the street life is going to develop, I looked at a lot of references from Hong Kong in the 1950s, and looking at a particular photographer, Fan Ho, who did amazing street photography in Hong Kong at that particular time. And I know that the period's different, but you look back at the earlier photographs from San Francisco, and that you can see that you know, within a Chinatown, within that kind of Asian community, there is like a particular sort of street life that you get. And so taking that, I wanted to, I like the idea of it being sort of a narrower street, but with more to play with on the interiors of each houses. So you can look through from one shop across the street and into the interiors on the other side. So you get that kind of depth and that kind of busyness, which was important to me. I wanted to feel that we were in the heart of that Chinese community in what is the shell of the sort of Western style architecture that you have in San Francisco. And then you contrast, you know, we know that we want to be in the Barbary Coast, which is this unchartable kind of no man's land between shore and sea and harbour, between what is now the harbour and this kind of muddy waste of these hulking shipwrecks and all of the kind of temporary structures that would have built up around that. And you know, I know there's no images of that at all. I read about it, and so in terms of what we wanted to say about the place, it being this kind of no man's land, full of bandits and bars and brothels and fight pits. We looked at it and tried to sort of give it a much more chaotic feel. So losing that grid form, American sort of street pattern, and getting into a much more chaotic sort of Dickensian almost sort of environment. And then you contrast that again with your uptown, the world of the politicians and the stone-clad buildings with all of their fine decorations, and then the tenements and the squalor of the Irish community, which, you know, again we got to fully expand upon that in terms of streets and layout, where we could actually create some of those tenements that you can see in some of those grainy black and white pictures from the late 1800s and early 20th century. And so it's like, you know, in terms of balancing and contrasting between those areas, so that you could emphasize as much as possible the differences within that one city.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, you were touching on this just now in terms of having locations where you can look out of one and you can kind of see into the next space. How how much detail is it useful for you to have in terms of what the producers and what the directors are planning in terms of how they want to film a space as you're mapping out what the design is going to be? I mean, regardless, you're still thinking about every single detail in every single corner because they might change plans, but kind of what are the useful elements for you to know in terms of how much detail you want to have about what the plan is in terms of camera work and how they plan to utilize the space for the performers?
Well, that's something that we can kind of offer up in some respects in terms of in terms of the staging. Like I say, you have these kind of key points within the script, which places in that particular street, Mai Ling, as she approaches this sick lady at the lemon store, and so we know that we need that store. We want to come through that life, and we want to be introduced to her. And so, what I like to do is to work on visuals as quickly as possible, so that you can give a kind of a dramatic illustration of the kind of whole view, and potentially a way that we could introduce those particular characters. And as Moira says, it was a very, very collaborative group, and so we could walk the course with Jonathan, who directed that first episode, along with Michael, the DOP. We could talk about how the light can land at the right point, and how the camera can find that moment. And then in terms of background action, that, you know, a street scene where you're coming down through a street, you want there to be that kind of life, which means that you can't have your extras and crowds sort of just standing around sort of pretending to do basic things. It's nice to be able to introduce, and Michelle Barford, our set decorator, was amazing with our prop master Di. We isolated who did what in what shot and what was happening in front of that shot, so that we could show them how to use the various different things that they were needing to use or to sell or whatnot. So we could actually give some sort of realism to what's going on the street. But it kind of all starts with the plan, the script, the plan. Then you plot the camera route. Then we can work out who we can find on the way, and then Moira can do her wonders with everybody that we're finding along that, and then you land on the Queen of Chinatown. So it's like and that in particular, that being our first episode, and all of those moments that we introduced in that first episode, this second season, was just super exciting, because we were right up against it in terms of time. There was, you know, we had geographical and all the usual sort of limitations in terms of trying to put these things together in a manner which can be schedule friendly and all those other things that have to come into place. And it just built like a crescendo as we ran through from our starter prep to that first day of shoot, where the meetings and the detail was continually applied in terms of how we were planning on hitting those particular moments.
Yeah. You know, and Moira, one of the things I was interested about in terms of your process is you're not just, you know, creating an overall look and feel for these characters. You're really looking at the journey and the arc that they're going on, and the way that you utilize details within the costumes to show an internal evolution is so beautifully done and crafted. You know, even if we look at like Assam and like the journey that he goes on throughout the series, and the way that he, different materials and different fabrics and textures to explore that. So I wanted to just ask you a little bit about, you know, what that journey looks like in pre-production, and how you're sitting there and working it out. And, you know, not just in terms with the producers and with the directors, but also with the actors as well, because, you know, they're bringing an interpretation of the character, but so are you within that work.
Yeah, well, like James also mentioned, his other two very important crew members, I'm in the same place. You know, to be a costume designer, you are not standing alone there creating all the magic. There's a big team behind me. I mean, I have to give a shout out to my background supervisor. Her name is Tracy Burke. I could not have done the job without her vision. She brought equally the amount of background that is fabulous, is really Tracy Burke. I mean, because I had to concentrate in getting the main cast sorted, I also had to I had to earn their trust, being the new girl who's coming onto the job. So a lot of that is also at play to meet them for the first time. They all coming from the previous season. And then, of course, also to get them excited about my ideas, you know. That is the way, and I must say I managed to actually do that. They were all, especially I mean, in my world, the women are the ones that got a lot of my attention. Not that the men didn't. I mean, we also developed some interesting new men characters in this season. I mean, I'm thinking about Zing, how incredibly strong and fabulous he is. Then we did Happy Jacks. We also basically, it's a thing where you have to make them excited to come for their costume fittings, because of course each episode, I mean, Jonathan Tropper also had this rule that none of the ladies were allowed to ever use a costume twice. So you have to be quite, you have to look at the episode, see how many costumes needs to be done, and then we have to build them. And because we built all of them, or there were some rentals that was cleverly worked into their costuming. I mean, I remember, for instance, when we read the surprise that there was going to be a whole table of upper class people at the Nellie Davenport mansion. You remember, James, you had to create the mansion and the silver service and I had to create white tie. And I all of a sudden said to my supervisor, we don't have these type of costumes, you know, it's next week. And you know, then you have to rush and bring some of the stuff in. But I must say that even as James mentioned, on the first frame of the first episode, I don't know if any of you can remember it, that's how much it grabbed me, we shot it first as well, actually, was the graveyard scene with Sophie and Leary. And I remembered when I watched the season now that we opened with this yellow light. And I can remember that Michael Snyman came to me and I thought, Michael, don't start with me, please. He said to me, can I have a yellow dress on Sophie, please, for the opening scene? And now I know why he asked for a yellow dress. And he asked James for yellow flowers, didn't he? Or he asked Di for yellow flowers. And if you think about that scene, it's glorious. It starts with that angel that's got a slight sort of Lycian yellow look about her as well. So yeah, I mean, sometimes we question other people's requests, but if it comes if it looks that good, then I don't mind also bringing my part, because there she was in a yellow dress.
Yeah. And in terms of the time period with the costumes, how specific and true to that do you feel that you need to stay versus when you can be more flexible and more contemporary with some of the fabrics and some of the materials and some of the styles and designs that you're pulling into these costumes?
Well, you see, what's quite interesting in the modern idiom of making television series, especially where we are now in 2020, is that when you take on what we call a historical project, there's a lot in the costume side a lot of rules that can be broken. I mean, James, in a way, from a set deck point of view and a set creation point of view, he has to stay sort of with the historical buildings and things. But I can throw the fantasy costumes in there and it just makes for more fantastic viewing, you know, because, I mean, think about both Atoy and Mei Ling. Their costumes has got absolutely nothing to do with 1864 or 1870 or 1872. It's just and I think that's maybe also the inspiration that did come from Jonathan Tropper. He said to me, please don't get stuck in the period. We want to make exciting television. And which creator doesn't like an invitation like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that was the thing. It was like, you know, we're not making a documentary. Yes, there's lots of exciting points to bring to it from referencing, but it's that kind of graphic novel approach, which we were talking about with regards to some of the framing and some of the photography, you know, that same with the set design, really. You want to sort of emphasize the graphic quality of certain things to be have that kind of impact when you first see them.
Yeah.
And so you break a few rules in the set design too.
I think we're all watching television series these days, looking where the historical process is getting slightly skewed to the side to make for interesting visuals. I mean, I think it's all become the norm that if you can bring something more creative, then and I mean, you still have to give the audience the feeling that they are watching a historical project. But in a series like Warrior, there's so many things that can bring the historical part, like even the background. They were classically dressed in Chinatown. It was the historical correct type of clothing, although we used some licensing with the colors and things. And also the Irish were very, very classical for the period that we were working with. And then you can bring in the sort of brush strokes of the interesting characters. Like, for instance, Vega, I mean, she's virtually dressed in steampunk. You know what I mean? The way I styled her. And it works so well. I mean, it really does. It works with a boat.
It absolutely does. And James, one of the other things that I was interested about from your perspective is, you know, you're filming the show on a studio lot in Cape Town, and, you know, there's great blessings of filming in a studio lot because you have the opportunity to really build something from scratch. But then on the same side, you have to build something from scratch. So it's interesting kind of like the pros and cons of that for you and what that looks like and how that feeds into your process when you're filming in that way.
Well, obviously, you know, there was an original core of the lot that was there, and so we sort of expanded around that central core for much of our San Francisco element. In reality, I think it's easier in some respects to create it from scratch because you've got the means to be able to be absolutely specific with regards to what you want to see. You know, the other side of it is that a large show like Warrior can't move around every day or twice a day in terms of that unit. So you're kind of you know, doing your utmost to keep it centered within our base at the studio. There were other bits of other backlot from past shows that are still standing in the Cape Town studios there, and so we could go through those and we could look at bits that could be adapted and that could be built onto and switch from what might have been something completely different in the past. But yeah, personally, I prefer to build from scratch if possible, and then especially when you're going to require so many different things later on and different streets and different, you know, we turned, you know, we more than doubled the size of the original lot that was there, but then we used all of the streets for at least 2 or 3 different moments from what they were first developed for. So again, having everyone and keeping everyone within the same base means that you're not fragmenting your crew everywhere, and you can see what's going on. You can visit the set a couple of times a day whilst visiting the 2 different units that might be shooting at that particular time. So it's a lot easier. And sort of the correct kind of, as Moira says, really you can't go into later locations and places like that. So we tried to, in terms of periods, we tried to keep location work to the more uptown, the political class and the wealthier sort of elements within the story, because then you get those the detail within the interiors, the moldings and the paneling and the exterior decorations, which are very time consuming and expensive and tricky to build at a fast pace, because it's like I think I've described it a few times as the kind of extreme sport version of art department sort of preparation. It's like being thrown out of a plane. When you sign up and you're going to get into it, it's just like you have to hit the ground running. You have to make 10 weeks of prep count. Every single one of them has to count to hit that first week. And then you're straight away clocks ticking in terms of how you turn that street into something else for later on in the story, and then something else again. And then you've got to weather eye on the fact that there's a gap between those two streets that could make quite a nice little alleyway for a Sui Singh hold up in a later episode, perhaps. And you know, it's like a puzzle in some respects. You're trying to sort of pull these various different things out of what you first built. So to have 10 scripts at the very beginning was a blessing, because you could plot your way through that. You could understand the fact that will come in handy later on for another moment.
Yeah. And Moira, one of the things that I was really interested in terms of the costumes was thinking about costumes in terms of a lot of the stunt sequences and a lot of the fight sequences, and how that really impacts a lot of the choices that you have to make, because you're not at that point just thinking about how does the costume tell a story, but you're thinking so in depth about the functionality of it and making sure that it really works for the actors in those scenes as well.
Yeah, that was actually something that I wanted to mention, that I think Brett did the most amazing job. I mean, I've never really in my entire career worked with somebody as incredible as he is, and so understanding. And I mean, there's an incident in a later episode that I don't know if I can talk about at the moment. I don't know where you want to place this interview, but it's an interview. It's a fight that Atoy actually has to go through in a later episode. And that particular costume that she had to wear for that had a lot of consideration to what, because, you know, Atoy's costumes are very structured. She couldn't possibly do a fight in any of those fabulous outfits of hers, you know. So it was very much that Brett came to me, and he came and visited me a couple of times, and he said to me, Moira, we've got to find the right costume for Atoy, otherwise we cannot choreograph this scene. So yes, you're right. There's a tremendous amount of fighting that's going on. In the costume department, there is a whole unit that is called the stunt costume unit that just dresses the stunt guys. And they all have their own costumes with certain requirements of stretched trousers. I mean, even Asham also has a whole set of suits that's different to his formal suit, where it's all stiff, where it's like in a stretchy fabric because he has to kick and do his thing. So yes, in a show like this, that's a whole other part of the job, is just to actually make sure that the stunt guys have got the right costumes. And something that I also remembered watching the series now again is that when we started off with the season, we brought in some of the original police uniforms that was used in season 1. And so maybe they came in 15 sets from a rental company in the States. But as the story progresses, we were all of a sudden asked for 35 police uniforms, because there is this fabulous scene where we even have got the cavalry on them on horseback. I mean, I think for me visually, that is actually one of the most beautiful frames that I've seen in the season, all these policemen coming towards you. So we had to build those, you know, we had to cast buttons, we had to find fabrics. It's all in a day's work, I suppose.
Well, you've both done such a fantastic job in the way that you've brought this series to life visually and really added your own creative stamp on this season. And I want to thank you both so much for diving into some of that process with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure working on Warrior too.